Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. My name is Juliette Faughnan. I'm the president of Sommer Consulting, and thank you so much for joining us at this webinar. So, as a researcher for over 20 years, one of the truest things that I have found in my career is that the questions matter. They matter. What are we challenging? What are we trying to see from a different perspective? What have we accepted that things are just the way they are, and we haven't pushed to transform our thinking into something richer or more nuanced? Am I asking the right questions, the hard ones sometimes? So at Sommer Consulting, for over 40 years, we've been asking questions of patients and caregivers and doctors and nurses. We've worked with the healthcare industry, not just to understand what's going to sell a product, but also to try and understand why is that product even needed and how is it going to help. We've done work with patients and their experience to help develop educational materials, to help understand how to better manage their side effects. This webinar was born from a question that we had noticed for many years in our early clinical research and research development. Why was there such a lack of diversity in clinical trials, especially in some cancers in particular that have greater morbidity and mortality in people of color? So in 2020, we launched research with For the Breast of Us under the leadership of our tremendous panelists, Marissa and Jasmine, to explore this very question and to speak with breast cancer thrivers and caregivers and other women of color to gather their views and perspectives on clinical trials. And what we unearthed was that there's a lot of uncertainty, there's misunderstanding into who's invited, who's included in clinical trials. And for too long, the right people were not included in the conversation, the right setup and explanations have not been offered, the right questions have not been asked. So today we've brought together this esteemed panel to explore this further, specifically looking at Black women in clinical trials. I am thrilled that we are having this conversation today, and that hundreds of you found this question important enough to be here today too. So thank you for coming, for submitting your questions, and for giving us your time today. So with no further ado, I would love to get into this and introduce you to our fantastic panel. So I'm going to start by sending you over to Danielle Mitchell, who is the CEO and founder of Black Women in Clinical Research.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Danielle Mitchell. I'm the CEO and founder of Black Women in Clinical Research. The mission of Black Women in Clinical Research is to educate, empower, support, and help Black women thrive in the clinical research industry. I started Black Women in Clinical Research after I attended an investigator meeting. In a room of hundreds of people, there were only 2 Black women, including myself. So it really made me question whether or not there was a lack of diversity in the industry or if there was a lack of diversity in the room. Currently, we have over 10,000 members. We help members that are interested in getting into the clinical research industry with our career services, resume review, interview prep, mock interviews, career coaching, and LinkedIn summary. We really want to make sure that we are giving our members the resources and tools necessary in order to succeed in the clinical research industry.
Thank you. I'll pass it over to Bree Davis, who's a clinical research coordinator at Velocity Clinical Research.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Juliette. My name is Bree, and I'm currently a clinical research coordinator at Velocity Clinical Research. We were formerly Meridian Clinical Research, but as of April 1st, we're now full-on Velocity. Currently, I am responsible for vaccine clinical trials that we have coming in. And prior to this, I worked over at Georgetown University in the breast oncology department, as well as in the genetic counseling department. And it was with Black Women in Clinical Research and Sommer Consulting that I was sponsored to go to last year's ACRP conference. And from there, that really put me face forward into what clinical research was about and allowed me to connect with individuals within the clinical research industry, which then led me to my current position.
Thank you. I'll pass it over to Marissa Thomas, who's the CEO and co-founder of For the Breast of Us.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Juliette said, my name is Marissa Thomas. I am the co-founder and CEO for The Breast of Us. I co-founded that with Jasmine Souers, who is also on the panel here today. I myself was diagnosed with breast cancer stage 2 at the age of 35. And when I was going through treatment and diagnosed, I didn't find other women who looked like me who had been diagnosed with breast cancer at a young age. And so I wanted to develop a community where we could all connect and share our stories and also advocate with each other. And so I teamed up with Jasmine Souers to create the first online community for all women of color who have been impacted by breast cancer, which is For the Breast of Us. Our 3 pillars are advocacy, community, and education. And we just want to make sure that we bring all women of color together so they can learn how to advocate for themselves, educate themselves when it comes to clinical trials and breast cancer, and then also develop a community with each other as well. I'm excited to be here and excited for this conversation.
Thank you. Now I'll pass it over to Jasmine Souers, who is the president and CEO of the Missing Pink Breast Cancer Alliance.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jasmine Souers. As Marissa said, we co-founded For the Breast of Us a few years ago. I started my work in the space as a patient advocate, wanting to build community again for women that I didn't see, wanted to be the woman that I was looking for other people. And today I'm doing more community building, not just for the patients, but for the people that are empowering the patients, the people that are supporting the patients, because we have complex problems, and complex problems require collaborative solutions. And so that's the work that I'll be doing at the Missing Pink Breast Cancer Alliance.
Thank you. And finally, I'd like to introduce Dr. Alexea Gaffney, who's a triple board certified physician and breast cancer survivor.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. I'm so in awe of every person in this panel today. I'm Dr. Alexea, triple board certified infectious disease physician. I'm also a stage 3 breast cancer survivor thriver. I was diagnosed at the age of 37. And I also carry a PALB2 genetic mutation, and I'm an ATM gene variant. I am a breast cancer advocate, a health disparities advocate, and I'm definitely an advocate for Black women participating in clinical trials. I've had the pleasure to partner with Jasmine and Marissa at For the Breast of Us. I also partner with Touch the Black Breast Cancer Alliance for their clinical trials missions work, getting more Black women involved. And then I'm the medical director of BRCA Strong. So I'm excited to be here.
Thank you all so much. So ready to jump right into some questions. I want to thank all of our viewers. Many people submitted questions in advance, and there's also a chat function where you can submit questions where we'll review them at the end as we have time as well. So my first question actually is for you, Dr. Alexea. I think sometimes we take for granted, especially myself working in healthcare, that everybody knows what a clinical trial is, that we understand how they're set up and what the details are. But the truth is that's really not the case. A lot of people don't have that understanding. So because of your vast experience, can you kind of level set us on what is a clinical trial and why is it so important for Black women to participate in clinical trials?
Absolutely. So clinical trials are an opportunity to explore how a treatment might impact a patient, right? Is it in the space of cancer treatments? Is there a treatment that can be given in addition to the standard of care that is either going to stop the disease or slow disease progression? Is it going to prolong life? And it's an opportunity to explore the side effects of a treatment and to see how it impacts different people, how it interacts with different medications, and so on and so forth. But not all clinical trials are necessarily testing a treatment. Clinical trials can also be questionnaires, they can be observations. It might involve doing extra imaging studies or extra tests. It might involve doing extra blood samples. It might just involve observing what happens to a population over time, seeing when side effects or known complications arise in different groups of people. But I think the most important thing to know about clinical trials is that clinical trials are not just letting random events happen to people. And I think that's one of the things that people of color particularly fear. Cancer clinical trials in particular, when it comes to treatment, there's no placebo. There is no chance that you would not be treated. Usually it's the standard of care plus the investigative drug. And so there's so many little nuances that are so important to clarify that often when the conversation about participating in a clinical trial is introduced, just like you said, right, we take for granted that we know, and it's often not described or discussed in the ask, because it is described and discussed in great detail during the consenting process. But many people don't get to the consent process because they only know what they know. They don't know what they don't know. And we as providers, clinicians, researchers, et cetera, when we're introducing this, we don't consider our own biases, we don't consider our own experiences, and we don't specifically consider who we're talking to and how we need to start that conversation, including addressing the questions, concerns, and then diving into the question of, do you want to participate? And here's what it looks like. And lastly, I'll say, we don't often share how it benefits the patient, the person that's in the room with the provider. I think that's something that is often not expressed. You know, we say, oh, you're going to be a superhero. You're doing good for the community, for future generations, et cetera. I'm here in the room. How does this benefit me, and why should I participate for reasons other than, you know, carrying the weight of the world on my back again as a Black woman? So I hope that helped.
Absolutely. I love that point that you just made. It's wonderful that it benefits other people, but it's okay to be in there and to want to do what's best for yourself and your own healthcare. Does anybody else want to add to that? No? Okay. I just have a follow-up on that, because to the best of my understanding, back in 1993, I think it was, the NIH initiated guidelines that required inclusion of women and minorities in clinical trials. But data since then shows that, you know, even when you're looking at like 2003 to 2016, there's a decrease in participation by African Americans and Hispanics in clinical trials. Do you have any thoughts as to why that is the case, that even though we're asking these questions, we're trying to build up participation, we may still be seeing declines in certain areas? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
You know, what I think is interesting is that for a while, we've been looking at those requirements as a nice to have and not a must have. And I really think that switch will make all the difference. However, having the requirement that it is a must have means if we are not very strategic and intentional about addressing those barriers, we then create barriers to research, right? Not just participation in clinical trials. So I think that's something very important to consider.
Thank you, Jasmine. So given what you just spoke about, why it's so important to participate, Jasmine and Marissa, working with patients and patient advocates on the day in and the day out, what do you hear as some of the biggest hesitations or barriers to participation in clinical trials?
I think Dr. Alexea, I think she mentioned a few of those. She touched on those very beautifully. We did our study, and a few of the things that came out of that were obviously the distrust, the fear, the access, and logistics. But what I loved about the study we did with Sommer Consulting is that we started with issues that have already been talked about a lot. And we said, knowing this, what can we do differently? A few things that I thought are worthy of highlighting outside of those things were issues like, we noticed that when white patients were encountering barriers, they were spending more time thinking of solutions, whereas we weren't seeing that with Black women. And so what does that tell us? That there's not only this hesitancy to ask questions, they're waiting for the question to be asked to them, but also they are dealing with oftentimes so many different issues that it feels like, I don't really want to take the time to figure out how to do this. It feels like an added thing to the life that I'm already dealing with, right? And also you think through the nuances of trust and what trust looks like. This idea of being conditioned by being misrepresented often, and that not just being with the person that's having the conversation, that's who's the person answering the phone. What does your staff look like? What are the culture? How do you interact with patients, right? What do your marketing materials look like? Because I've even had that experience where I'm in a facility where I know there are not a lot of Black patients, and they don't have Black patients on their marketing materials, and yet they have Black patients on posters for clinical trials. Those one-off efforts to be inclusive do nothing but unintentionally drive that conversation about distrust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think I'll add even on to that too. It's, you know, a lot of us, the decrease that you're seeing, a lot of us aren't even offered clinical trials. No one's actually even bringing that to the table when our treatment options are presented to us. It's just, these are your treatment options, but clinical trials isn't even on the table. So unless you're patient advocates like ourselves, or you work in the medical field and you ask your provider, like, hey, is there a clinical trial that I can participate in? Then does that conversation start? But if you don't even know to ask that, or if it's not even being offered to you, how are we even going to get to that first step in the first place?
And to build on that, I know we also heard in the research, some people think a clinical trial means it's your last resort. You've tried everything else.
And I would say too, it's not even that it's, you know, think it's our last resort. A lot of times it's presented to us as our last resort.
That part.
Yeah.
That part.
When we're already failing a treatment.
Right.
Yeah.
And but what was also interesting in that, because when we talk about, we're talking specifically about Black women, but you think about the number of patients that are participating in clinical trials in large, it's still relatively small. And what's interesting about that last part is that the white women were saying very similar things, right? That they thought that clinical trials were also last resort options. The difference was that white women were being offered them a lot earlier in the process.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to something that you said, Jasmine, about representation. And we heard that a lot in the research, that patients really value seeing people in the clinical trial process that look like them, you know? So Danielle, since this is something that you really look at, could you speak to this a little bit from your perspective in terms of why is it so important that in conversations about inclusion, that we include Black clinical trial researchers in that discussion as well?
So it's important because Black people have unique perspectives. So you need to see people who look like you. You have to bring those experiences to the table. And it's really essential for promoting equity and addressing health disparities in clinical research. And a lot of times when I would talk to members, or I always use my family for an example. You know, one of my family members had told me that their mother was having breast surgery. And they're really afraid about her mother having the breast surgery. And in walks a Black doctor. And they immediately felt comfortable. And they even asked the doctor, can I hug you? So there is a sense of, you know, relief and understanding that you have when you see someone who looks like you, that can understand your challenges. A lot of times people think, well, if I am resistant, or I have a strong feeling about not participating in clinical trials, you know, that's not where you shouldn't offer clinical trials to me. It should be an opportunity for you to take the time and understand, you know, what is my hesitation with participating in a clinical trial? And like everyone said, a lot of people who go to the doctor, they're not being offered clinical trials as a healthcare option. And clinical research is separate from healthcare. And so we really need to tie those two with each other. And also, you know, just like I said, I use my family, like my father, he had an allergic reaction to a drug. And his doctor didn't know that this drug in Black people causes, you know, this type of reaction. And he didn't get this drug once, but he also got it twice. So he ended up in the hospital. And so a lot of times the doctors are not even aware that these drugs can cause these type of side effects. And, you know, people of color that are patients. And I also wanted to touch a little bit on what you said earlier. I feel like when we should educate people before they go to the clinic. That shouldn't be the first time that we're hearing about clinical trials. And I think that we are missing, you know, a big area, like a big gray area, because we need to talk to people in the community about, you know, first appealing to people in their overall health before you even introduce clinical trial as a care option. So this means being involved in the community, meeting people where they are at, where they feel comfortable at. And I think that will really change, you know, the participation. You know, if people can see people actually coming into the community and talking to them, instead of just for this being a transactional, you know, oh, I want you to participate in a clinical trial, and not looking at people as another number. I know that this could help with the clinical trial participation.
Danielle, could you add to that a little bit in terms of what you actually do at your company and how you're bringing people into clinical research?
Absolutely. So for me, it was extremely challenging to get into clinical research. When I decided not to, go to medical school, I received some challenges with getting in. A lot of the positions would say that they were entry level, but they required 2 years of experience. So how can I gain that experience if no one is willing to hire me? And so that's, I realized that there was challenges. And so when I felt like I was finally able to crack the code, and I was finally able to get into clinical research by going on clinicaltrials.gov, finding the nearest clinics to me and asking them, can I shadow, can I intern? So a lot of times there is a lack of diversity in the clinical research workforce because these opportunities are not even being presented to us. Clinical research was never discussed as a career option at my college or university. And so we recently did a market study with Black women in clinical research members, and we realized that we have to introduce these careers in clinical research earlier. We can't wait until people start working in the workforce. We need to start talking about clinical research in middle schools, high schools, colleges. That is the key point of where we can pique people's interest about clinical research. So with Black women in clinical research, we are helping people with their resumes. We want to make sure that your resume has transferable skills, it has the buzzwords, because a lot of times you don't know, and especially with clinical research, I tell people it's a different type of industry. You can't have just a normal resume and think, okay, it's going to go through the applicant tracking system and, I'm just going to get hired. A lot of, getting involved in clinical research is networking and who you know. So you really have to play up on your skills. You have to be able to network. You have to be able to talk to people. And so, we're helping with that. Every month we talk about different clinical research careers. We have partnered with different HBCUs, Morehouse School of Medicine, pretty soon, Meharry Medical College. So we want to actually introduce these career options to medical students, nursing students, because clinical research is not discussed there. So how can we change the workforce if we are not actually going to, schools and telling our future clinical researchers about these opportunities?
Thank you. Bree, I would love for you to speak to this as somebody that's newly in this field. And what has it been like for you so far from getting into being in this field now? And what's been your experience?
Yep. So like how Danielle was saying, like the conversation about clinical trials needs to be started sooner with like middle school and high schools, because like Danielle, I didn't know anything about clinical research in my undergrad years. And had I known about it, I probably would have pursued a different degree and probably would have went to grad school for a different master's and would have started my career in clinical research earlier. But again, I didn't have anyone who looked like me to talk about the clinical trials. And like how Danielle was saying, representation does matter, because it's like, if I don't see anybody who looks like me, why would I want to participate in something or a clinical trial if I don't see somebody that I can relate to? How does that benefit the community as a whole? And how does that benefit me? So I think it is important to have these conversations, prior to like a clinic visit, making it seem like it's the patient's last resort. And I would like to add on to that. I went to the Baltimore Health Expo back in March, and we had a table for our clinical trials. And we had a lot of individuals from like, the inner city of Baltimore come up to our table, and they were asking about like, oh, what is clinical trials? And so we would explain to them like, what is a clinical trial? What is it that the company that I work for specifically does? And a lot of individuals did say that they were hesitant because it's just like, okay, well, these are clinical trials, but there's no one within our community to like come out and tell us about these things. And it's also too, you got to look at where these individuals live, because it's not fair to have, a clinical trial site in a more affluent part of town, but then when you go onto the other side of town, there's nothing there for individuals. And these individuals like live in a food desert or don't have many healthy options. So I think it's now a time to like make sure that we get individuals that can represent us and who look like us to get that other population within clinical trials.
Thank you.
And Juliette, just to follow up on this idea of representation, which I think is important, because it's not one of those things like if they build it, they will come, right? If you look at ethnic marketing, when you market things to Black women drive culture. That is like research, when you market things to Black women, other people want to be part of that. But that does not work in the opposite way, right? So when we're in spaces and they are predominantly white, it looks like it's white intentionally because historically, those spaces were created to be white intentionally. So when we think about representation, we have to recognize that that comes with action and intentionality to increase representation.
Thank you. You've clearly spoken a lot as to what some of these issues are, why it's important, but I think the key part now is now what, right? What do we do with all of this? How do we make any of this better or different? Jasmine, I know last year you participated in the Black Women Speak Symposium, which was meant to, I believe, to amplify Black patient-led research efforts, correct? Could you tell us a little bit about why it's so important for collaboration from that sense to breaking down those barriers? How does collaboration feed into that as an answer?
So the Black Women Speaks effort was an effort led by the Metastatic Breast Cancer Alliance and Stephanie Walker, who led the Become Project. And the Become Project was specifically about increasing diversity in clinical trials for Black people living with metastatic breast cancer. So I think it's so important that we make sure we recognize the efforts of people living with metastatic breast cancer that are contributing to this space, and also the unique barriers that people living with metastatic breast cancer are having in accessing clinical trials. The thing about collaboration is it's not just a feeling, it is a fact. When you bring people together from diverse perspectives and opinions, it creates better solutions, more flexible solutions. And it's not just a matter of, we're not going to be able to copy and paste our way out of this issue, right? Our best strategies are going to come from knowing our communities, but understanding what's working and not working in other communities is also going to help us think through how we can make things work better. So collaboration is key. That's the heart of the work that we're doing at the Missing Pink, innovation through collaboration.
Marissa, could you please add to that? I know that you have just worked tirelessly to build this with For the Breast of Us, connecting women with research and education to empower them to do that, to take those avenues to learn. And also extended to that, if you could talk a little bit about where do you go? Where do you send women to learn about inclusion in clinical trials?
I mean, it's webinars like this. It's some of our other, partners who are in the community like Touch or Tiger Lily. It's participating in a lot of the conferences that are happening. So like SABCS, YSC, Living Beyond Breast Cancer just had their metastatic conference. It's actually being in the room with those individuals who are talking about, the newest and the latest, but then also going with your communities, like For the Breast of Us and other patient advocates, and speaking to other patients, especially women who are living with metastatic disease, and talking with them and hearing what it's like being on a clinical trial, what that process was like, the different types of paperwork that they maybe have to fill out. It's actually having patients talking about their experience so that way they understand it. A lot of us on this panel, as I said before, we understand clinical trials, we understand the medical jargon and what comes with that, but just the layperson doesn't understand that. And so we have to think of it in that perspective, especially as medical providers who are maybe listening or watching this right now. It's like, if you were going to approach your patient with a clinical trial, how are you going to approach that with them? And are you going to come with them with all this medical jargon? Or are you going to have maybe, a patient advocate come into the room with you and explain what a clinical trial is, and then talk about what it's like and what the process is, and how we can have somebody walk you through this process, from beginning to end. But it's definitely just meeting the patients exactly where they're at and giving them the information that they need.
Wonderful. Dr. Alexea, we have a lot of people from pharma, medical device manufacturers, biotech on this call. And if they're not on this, they know people that are in those industries. So what suggestions would you have to the organizations that are leading these trials to increase more diversity in their clinical trial research?
Definitely representation matters, right? It's something that we are always talking about with For the Breast of Us and across the Black breast cancer community. Recent data just came out that when there's a Black doctor in the community, or when Black people are taken care of by Black doctors, they live longer and they have better outcomes. We know this to be true for Black infants as well. And so it's hard not to imagine that that would be the case when we're talking about clinical trials. You know, COVID is still COVIDing, but, you know, even when I think about COVID and a lot of the work that I did in that space, I would be talking to complete strangers at churches, at community-based organizations, just online doing virtual talks about COVID vaccination and clinical trials with the general public. And hundreds of people would just be on an Instagram Live and say, okay, I'm listening. Let me ask the questions. Okay, I trust you because you're a member of our community. You're doing the work. And people I don't know in real life, who I will never see in person, hundreds of people would say, okay, I'm going to go get the vaccine because I listened. I trust you. I'm going to go get the vaccine because you're connected with a person I trust, or because I relate to your story. And clinical trials would be no different. I've talked to so many women as a breast cancer advocate about clinical trials, and people would say, well, of course, you know, you're a doctor, you're going to say that. It's kind of like it's us and it's them, and I'm in the them just by having the doctor title. But when I said to people, like, I participate in clinical trials, and I've been participating in clinical trials since I was 21 years old, and people being able to ask questions and explore that with me, not just as a physician, but as an individual who shares their lived experience, it really made a great impact. It really perked up their ears. So, you know, these companies have to come to our community where we receive our information. And it's often our churches, it's often our community-based organizations. And it worked really well with COVID-19 vaccine and testing efforts and just receipt of information. And I think, you know, there has to be some partnership with community organizations in addition to the medical facilities and the healthcare communities, but also partnering with our smaller healthcare facilities. We are not all going to receive cancer care at a university hospital or at an NCCN hospital or cancer center. And so I think we have to come out into the spaces where most of the people are being treated, especially most of the people who look like us in this space today.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please.
So what I have noticed, especially with working in the industry, is that we usually select the same clinical trial sites to conduct the clinical trials. So for anyone that is here from a CRO or pharmaceutical company, we have to give some of those smaller clinical trial sites an opportunity because they're the ones that are reaching that diverse patient population. So I know a lot of times because you might have had a clinical trial with the previous site, it's easier to go through the feasibility process, like everything. But if you choose a site that is in a rural area or a different population, then that really can help with the diversity of the patient population as well.
Thank you. So we've gotten some questions from our viewers, so I'd love to pose them. So this one's for the whole panel, so whoever wants to speak to this one is great. How would you speak to the historic abuses to the Black community in the name of research? And with that, do you find resistance to even supporting clinical trial work based on those fears of history repeating itself?
Absolutely. I was gonna say, I experienced this. I went to a Black Health Matters summit, and some of the people from the community, and despite what people may think, they think, okay, well, Black people don't want to participate in clinical trials. But I was actually there and I introduced myself. The people of the community came up to me and told me, these are my fears that I have. This is my resistance. I don't want to be a guinea pig. People, if you allow for people to share this information, they will tell you exactly what their fears are. They will be very, open with you and honest. So when I was in this community setting, people told me, I don't want to be a guinea pig. I know about Henrietta Lacks. I know about the Tuskegee syphilis study. So you have to be prepared to answer these questions and let people know, yes, this is what happened in the past, but we have rules and regulations now here in the future where this will not happen. And for them to see someone who looks like them telling them this eased a lot of people. Once we had these conversations, I went through, talking to a person who was like, I don't want to be a guinea pig. And so I'm just telling them, I'm like, we have to be involved in this process because you want to make sure that the drugs are safe and effective for not just you, but for your whole community. If breast cancer runs in your family, why wouldn't you want to be involved so that you can help your family members find a treatment for Black women? And, you know, with me and my family, breast cancer does run in my family. And so my grandmother didn't tell anyone that she had breast cancer. And this is a lot of reasons, you know, especially in the Black community. If we have an illness, we don't share this. And so no one in your family a lot of times knows that you're going through this. So I feel like we have to be that supportive, that trusted community partner, and to be that person there for our family and to let them know you can talk about your health with me. Or if you know a family member, hey, have you had your, you know, when was the last time you had a mammogram? You know, asking those questions and not making it seem where talking about your health is something that we don't do, but we have to be more involved with our family members, our community, our health. It's just important to help with health disparities and health equity.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think it's just address the elephant in the room, bring it up. I don't think that you should be talking to a person of color about clinical trials without addressing the medical mistrust. I think it shows compassion, it shows care and concern. It shows that you're educated in the history of what has happened to Black people in this country and that you're interested in addressing that and keeping clinical trial participants safe. So I think it must be brought up in these spaces and these conversations.
And I think the other part of that is that it must be a conversation. I think that is one of the things that we saw in our study is that women were preferring to have conversations. You know, in the digital age, we've tried to like automate so many things and let me just send you a video or let me just send you a brochure, but there has to be space for us to have these conversations.
Yeah.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add to that one?
On that, and then I would say like re-ask the question. Like let's just normalize asking again at the next visit, right? How many visits do we clock over the course of cancer treatment or cancer screening if you're high risk, or even if you're, you know, involved in some sort of subspecialty care? Just keep asking. Like a no today doesn't necessarily mean a no tomorrow. If it was diabetes and our patient was like, you know, I know my A1C is out of control, I know I need to address my weight, give me a little more time. We give them 3 months, we bring them back, we see what happens. So why can't we keep addressing it each and every visit? You know, before we close the visit, I just would like to revisit the conversation about the possibility of participating in clinical trials. Did you come up with any questions? Did you talk to anybody else? Did you do some research on your own? Like, what are your thoughts? Did anything else come up for you? Like, keep it an ongoing conversation.
Excellent, thank you.
I would add too, if this is okay, I would say to have signage, you know, if I remember I worked at it was an oncology hospital, and I talked to my doctor, and I was like, our numbers are low, like our accrual is really low. And so I said, can you help me understand, because I know you see a lot of patients. And so he told me that he forgets to ask the patients about, if they can participate in the clinical trials. So maybe there can, be a pen or something, ask me about clinical trials, or, having that signage there available for patients to see, even if you might not remember as a healthcare professional, that this will, I would say make people want to ask, okay, can you tell me if there is a clinical trial that I may qualify for? So I think that would be good as well. And just having that, open conversation, like you said. I remember I went to an event recently that was with Texas Southern, and one of the doctors had mentioned that her patient had said that I'm gonna give it up to God. Like so they said that the doctor thought because the patient was spiritual and said that they meant that they didn't want to participate in clinical trials. But we all know that, when it comes, especially a lot of times with the Black community, our healthcare and our faith goes hand in hand. Mm-hmm. So they were saying, don't discount the person who says that, I'm gonna put it in God's hands, because that doesn't mean that they're not going to participate in clinical trials. So I thought that was a really good point that she brought up, because I know my family will be the same exact way. So I would just say being open and not just think that because, that they're going to say no to a clinical trial.
And just two thoughts on that. One, I think that really illustrates the importance of policies and procedures that drive equity, not feelings, right?
Yes.
If it is the practice that we ask, that we do these things, then that happens for everyone across the board. The other thing that I think is very important is trust, who's having this conversation. So one of the things I loved about the study that we did with Sommer Consulting too, is that even when race was a trust building factor, regardless of race of the person having that conversation, the way they were being treated was the main trust building factors. It's how are you talking to me? Are you listening to me? Are you allowing me to make decisions with you? And I think it's important that we say that, because I don't want anyone to walk away feeling like if I'm not a Black provider, if I'm not Black, then I don't have ownership or I don't have influence in this space, and that's not the case.
Thank you. So along these lines, Dr. Alexea, a question came up for you.
Mm-hmm.
And the person said, is it up to me to search the national trial database for the most appropriate trial for me? My doctors are only presenting the trials available at their affiliated hospital as an option. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think patients should absolutely feel empowered to go on a site like clinicaltrials.gov and see if there's a clinical trial that may be right for them. Because probably a doctor, if they even remember, right? You just said like the doctor forgets to ask. How could you forget to ask? The forgetting is happening because it is not the standard of care. It needs to be the standard of care, as Jasmine said. But if somebody is involved in a particular trial, yes, they're going to present that because they're working on their own numbers, their outcomes, their data, et cetera. But it doesn't mean that patient care stops there, right? You wouldn't not refer a patient to a consultant outside of your expertise if you were in over your head on something. So it would be the same for a clinical trial. I can refer a patient to a clinical trial, even if I'm not participating, but it's why we are all here as healthcare advocates, is because we so often have to advocate for ourselves. We so often have to prepare ourselves for the visit, find data, prepare ourselves to ask educated questions, and the same would be true for clinical trials. So it should not be your responsibility, but until it is a normalized standard of care to involve patients in clinical trials or have the conversation, then we have to advocate for ourselves in that way and do the work, because we're taking our lives into our own hands in that sense.
Thank you. Bree, a question came for you that said, how do you message when you're talking to individuals about trials? How do you message that people of color being a part of treatments that are customized for our needs can only happen by joining in these efforts?
Mm-hmm. So I would say for me personally, in like my current role, I haven't actually ran into a participant that is a participant or a patient of color yet. So because of that, it is kind of hard to get those patients of colors in. However, when I worked in the genetics office, I had more conversations with individuals who were hesitant to get genetics done because, again, of the Tuskegee and again of the Henrietta Lacks, they were like, okay, well, if I'm submitting my blood to see if I have a genetic mutation, how do I know this is not going to be used against me later? And it's just, you have to, again, explain it to them like, your family has a history of X, Y, Z and cancer. Why wouldn't you want to know if you had a genetic mutation that could be linked to this? And if you do have said genetic mutation, there are trials that you can participate in for medicines that, reduce the risk of you developing said cancer. And so I would say for my mom specifically, I don't want to say I forced her. I highly suggested that she get genetic testing done because my grandma had pancreatic cancer. And from my mom getting genetic testing done, found out that she has an ATM gene mutation. And so that led me to, okay, well, maybe I should get genetic testing done. But thankfully, I didn't have the same mutation as my mom. But because of that, now we know that, okay, you need to, go in and get your yearly mammograms more often, and also let the provider know that you do have this ATM gene mutation. Therefore, in the event that a clinical trial comes up specifically for that, maybe you could participate. That will not only help you, but help me and my future family.
Excellent, thank you. Marissa, a question came in for you. So what is the advocacy work that For the Breast of Us does for more women to join clinical trials?
Some of the advocacy work that we do is, working with like organizations like Living Beyond Breast Cancer, Our Touch, BBCA, and getting involved in what an actual clinical trial is, participating in like Project Lead with MBCC, so patient advocates can learn about the science behind breast cancer. And I think once you get some of that knowledge behind you, you're like, okay, that kind of fires you up and you're like, let me get involved and started in these things. Like myself in particular, I'm on an IRB because I want to make sure that all the clinical trials that are going through a certain cancer center, that those are being looked at and that they're actually diversified. And if they're not, stopping some of the providers and the clinicians there at the table and saying, okay, so why aren't we reaching out to more people? How can we change this? And so it's actually getting us into those type of rooms and those tables and actually having the clinicians or the healthcare providers or anybody that's at that table thinking about what are the stopgaps here and how can we, prevent that from happening and, move it forward. Like one of the things that I love that Dr. Alexea said, it's like actually acknowledging what has happened in the past. We definitely have to acknowledge that, and you have to continue to do that. And then also just acknowledge where the patient is at. I recently seen a provider, and one of the things that I loved is that she kept asking me after every step. She was just like, what questions do you have here? What questions do you have here? And then at one point, like I had a question, but chemo brain kicked in and I forgot about it. And she was like, well, I'm not going to leave the room until, that question comes back to you so I can make sure that it's answered. And, writing down everything. We get told so much information when we're at, a doctor's visit, but just writing down all of that information so that way when the patient goes home, they can take a look at it or they can give it to their significant other or their family or friends, and they can look at it as well, and just have a second eyes on it. So I think from an advocacy perspective, what Dr. Alexea said before, like we have to advocate for ourselves, but then bringing other people into that conversation as well.
Okay, I have two good questions I want to ask you. So one's connected to that. So let me go to that first. This is for the whole panel, but how can community health advocates play a more integral role when you think about it from a health literacy and a clear language lens? So I love when you were saying, what questions now? What questions now? In health literacy, it's about chunking and it's about doing things in the time when it comes up. So what other ways do you think that can be integrated as well?
I think we have to just normalize having health conversations, and just normalize like health literacy should be something we should be developing in our communities. We should be doing it, in our youth. We should be doing it across the ages, and we need to do it in an age appropriate manner. We need to do it in a manner that reflects diseases that disproportionately impact our communities. And it needs to be an ongoing conversation. It can't wait until the disease has happened, right? There is no reason that young Black women shouldn't be educated in their community, their churches, their schools, their college, et cetera. And it is happening now, but shouldn't be educated about breast cancer because we get it younger, we get diagnosed later stages, we're more likely to die. More aggressive forms of cancer, understanding our genetic risk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? We cannot wait until the disease has landed to now put all of this on a patient to understand. We have to just have these conversations in spaces where Black folks are consistently showing up. And for us, it is our churches, it's our community organizations, it's our sororities, our fraternities, our business groups, it's all of those things. Like we have to, as a medical community, as a research community, like partner with those organizations that are a strong presence in our community to build our health literacy.
I think it has a lot. Oh, sorry, I was going to add. I was going to say, I think it has a lot with being intentional, showing up in your community. Mm-hmm. And like, for example, I had a Black Women in Clinical Research t-shirt on, and I went to go get my hair done. Sometimes I forget that I have my shirt on, and a Black lady was getting her hair washed, and she looked at my shirt and she was like, what is Black Women in Clinical Research? And I started explaining to her, and she said, the only reason I asked you about that was because you're a Black woman. So, being that person in your community, I probably wear my shirt so much that, people probably around me in my community are like, okay, there goes that lady wearing that clinical research shirt. But, I make sure that I'm intentional and to start those conversations with people and to have those different health fairs and not, realizing, going to the nail salon is another place you can have these conversations. Like I talked to my nail tech about clinical research, and I talked to my makeup artist about clinical research. Like wherever I go, whether it's the grocery store, I met a college student that was a cashier, and she told me she was a biology major. I'm like, have you ever considered a career in clinical research? So I feel like I'm a walking advertisement. I'm always telling people about clinical research. And so, when we make it, like you were saying, Dr. Alexea, like making it part of our normal conversation, making it like this is our life and this is what we're passionate about. So making sure other people see your passion and just introducing that to people. And, once you start talking about it, people are like, okay, well, how do I find out more information? So that sparks a whole nother conversation. So being that, like I said before, that trusted community partner where people feel comfortable coming to you and asking you questions and just being available for people.
It's great intention, being purpose-driven. I have one last question for Dr. Where did this one go? So, or actually this could be for the panel. So as an advocate, what can I do when I receive pushback because an individual was told by a Black healthcare professional not to participate?
I think it is important to push right back and not in a way that is forceful or beating the person upside of the head, but just saying, it's quite possible that this person is leading with their own personal opinions and their own personal biases. They're not leading with science. They're not leading with fact. They're not, expressing an understanding that we have institutional review boards, that, it's not just the people who are in the hospital or healthcare or involved in it's people outside of the trial who get to say, is this a safe trial? Is this trial equitable? Is this an appropriate endpoint? I think it's very important to just express that healthcare providers come with their own biases. As an infectious disease doctor, taking care of the LGBTQIA community, folks who are living with HIV, folks who are at risk for HIV, my patients are stigmatized most often by other healthcare providers because of provider bias. It exists. I think the best way to manage that is to define it and to say, I think this person was speaking from emotion and personal feelings and not speaking from science and facts.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add to that?
I want to add to that, and I'm trying to speak in between the lawnmower and the background, so I'm sorry. But I think this really speaks to, like, we talk about community, right? Change happens in communities, and that's why the point earlier, like, what can the larger organizations do is support community grassroots efforts. But to that point, educated speakers, educated advisors is so important, because the bias is not only happening with providers, it is also happening with patients who are put in positions that don't necessarily have the knowledge to speak to that. So when you're thinking about connecting with communities and bringing in educators, you have to make sure that these people are well-versed in the topic so that you don't contribute to the myths and misinformation.
Thank you. So looking at the clock, I can't believe that hour went so quickly. As we start coming to a close, I would just love to give each of you a moment to give a quick closing statement, or if you have an action item that you'd like our listeners to walk away thinking about, that would be great.
I'll start. Again, I'm Dr. Alexea. I'm so grateful for everyone's time, attention, and their questions today. I would say, if you're someone who, regardless if you're a patient, if you are here from a hospital, a pharmaceutical company, a research organization, et cetera, I think a fantastic resource is whenwetrial.org. It is the website that was created by Touch the Black Breast Cancer Alliance, who's literally been traveling the country, showing up in spaces where Black women are at, and taking breast cancer survivors, taking clinical trial participants with them to share the stories and share how clinical trials can benefit us. I think if you see the faces, you see the stories, I think that will sit with you. And when you go back to that bench, when you go back to that board meeting, when you go back to that IRB, or when you go back to your computer to work, you will have stories, faces in mind of the types of women whose lives we're hoping to save through clinical trial participation. So that would be a site I would check out, whenwetrial.org. It's an organization that I have partnered with and will continue to partner with for the long haul because of the wonderful work they're doing.
Thank you so much.
I'll go.
Thanks,
I think from a patient standpoint, especially from having been on this webinar, to I encourage individuals to go to clinicaltrials.gov and see, or type in the search engine, types of clinical trials that you may like to participate in, and then have those open conversations with your providers. And if your providers aren't, giving you the information or the answers that you're looking for, maybe go into different groups, like Black women in clinical research, or even Black men in clinical research, and ask those individuals about their perspective on clinical trials. And then, if you want to participate, apply if you can.
Thank you.
I guess I'll go next. I would just say definitely, anybody that's listening, it's partnering with us patient advocates and partnering with us organizations who are actually doing the work at the community level, getting involved with us, having us speak on panels like this, maybe coming in and talking to your staff member, your boards, everyone that's there. So you can just see some of the work that we're doing and some of the things that we're hearing from the community. And, maybe just boots on the ground, getting out there with us and talking with the people and, seeing what their hesitation is, or seeing what it is that you can make them more comfortable and their families more comfortable. Because not only should those of us who have been diagnosed with cancer be participating in clinical trials, we need people who haven't even been touched by diseases. So that way we could stop these diseases in the long run. So definitely just partnering with us. This was an amazing conversation, and I hope that we can, continue it even further than where we are right now.
Thank you.
And I would say know your role and get started with what you have and what you know, and the awareness of what you don't know. You cannot solve patient problems without patients. And so I think if you're ready to make the change, take that assessment and start to make the connections. Just a couple people can do great things in the world,
Thank you.
I would like to add, just like you said, Jasmine, I would say that I started with Black women in clinical research as a one-woman army. And, to look at it now, from going to having this Facebook group and turning it into a company with having, over 15,000 people, within this group, we have the ability to make a change. If we want to change in our community, we can do it. And then, like you said, partnering with different organizations, whether you want to work in clinical research or whether you're interested in, clinical research, there is a wealth of knowledge here with the ladies on the panel. So please feel free to reach out to any of us. I know that we are willing and able to support. So just feel comfortable making that initial step, because together we can do so much. And throwing in a little plug here, if that's okay, we are having a Black Women in Clinical Research conference. So this is the first clinical research organization that is putting on a conference that is for Black women. And so we want to have these type of events where we can talk about the different issues that we have with patient advocates and talk to clinical research, the clinical research workforce. So really trying to bridge that gap and to, like we said, being active and seeking us out, and we will help you in return.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'd love to send out a tremendous thank you to the insiders and the Sommer Consulting team that helped us put this together, especially Mary Fox and Alyssa Medwinter, who got us through all of our Zoom setups. I'd like to thank everyone who signed up to listen to this important topic and who asked the questions. And most importantly, I'd like to thank our amazing panelists for sharing your time, your expertise, and clearly your passion for this topic. If you have any friends or colleagues you think will be interested, there will be a link sent out with the whole meeting that you can share with others as well that might not have been able to attend. We'll also send out a feedback form. So tell us what you liked, what you didn't, what you might want in future talks. We'd love to do more of these. And also, if you have a minute, I'd love for you to sign up at theinsiders.com, where you can get paid to share your thoughts about healthcare insights as well. Thank you so much for your time, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.